Hello everyone, this is Yansha Mindrala, rule number 2195180552, and this is my semester 3 PPT of subject Programming with Objects, and my topic is Grid Layout Manager. Introduction. Layout Manager. The Layout Managers enable us to control the way in which visual components are arranged in the GA formats by determining the size and position of components within the containers. Java Flow Layout. Flow layout is a default layout, which means if you doesn't set any layout in your code, then layout would be set to the flow by default. Flow layouts put components such as text fields, buttons, labels, etc. in a row. If horizontal space is enough to hold all components, then the flow levels add them in a row and so on. Example. Here is an image of frame 8 buttons have been added to the frame under flow layout. Such you can see the 7 and 8 buttons are in the second frame because the first the first 6 buttons consume all the horizontal spaces. Points to note. All rows in flow layout are center aligned by default. As you can see in the above image that button 7 and 8 in the center. However, we can set alignment to left or right. We will learn about in it later in this post. The, the default horizontal and vertical gap between the components in 5 pixels. By default, the component orientation is left to right, which means the components would be added from left to right. However, we can change it to right to left as well. We will see that later in this post. What is layout manager in Java? Layout manager. We have already seen a layout manager can arrange the various components in a container such as layout manager through an object of classes, implements, and layout manager interface is produced. The layout interface therefore defines the methods that are necessary for the arrangement of AWT and swing components. Java provides a numerous classes that implement with this interface and ultimately differ in that they divide the container area into different divide areas. Layout managers distribute the entire space. The container area depends on the component center, whereby each according to layout is partially inserted. Layout manager in Java. He layout we will specify the format or order in which components have got to be placed on the computer. Layout manager may be a class or components that is responsible to rearrange the component on the container consist with the required layout. A layout manager automatically arrange your controls within a window by using some sort algorithm. Each container figures a layout manager related to it. A layout manager is an instance of any class that implements the layout interface. The layout manager is about by the set layout method. If no call to set layout is formatted, then the default layout manager is employed. Whenever a container is resized or sized for the primary time, the layout manager is employed to the position which of the components within it. The set layout method has a subsequential general from void set layout manager layout object. Java layout managers. The layout manager uses to arrange the components in a particular manner. The layout manager facilities as to control the posting and the size of the components in GI forms. Layout manager is an interface that is implemented by all the cases of layout managers. There are following classes that represent the layout managers. Java.aw.border layout, Java.aw.flow layout, Java.aw.grid layout, Java.aw.card layout, Java.aw.gridbag layout, JavaX.swing.box layout, JavaX.swing.group layout, JavaX.swing.control panel layout, JavaX.swing.spring layout, etc. Flow layout as layout manager. To arrange the component in a container in a fluid manner, one uses an objects of classes flow layout as layout manager. Flowing here means that the components are inserted in the container line by line from left to right. Be observed that is the components are so long in the other their insertions of from left to right side by side until there is no more space for the next components available and start with a new line which is then filled in the same way. The orientation of components in the line is centered by default. Between the components there is distance of 5 pixels horizontally and vertically. The size of components is not changed in the class. The flow layout we find the following constructors. The testing Java class. First, we should import modules such as import java.awt, import java.swing. Then going to our main method, main program, we can first define a class, public class testing extension JFrame, container C, and we call label class. We create an instance to the label class. Label class is equal to label of new label, and beside our inside our class we can write some code snippet of code to create labels, and by using the by using layout managers we can pack in the frames. We can work in our self-written class label Java and JLabel called label with the four components of that type. In that constructor, we create our testing class for these four label components. The corresponding objects of the label class we where we set the foreground color white and the background color black. We also use the italic serif in every labels 28 point font. If we start testing class, the initial according space required by the relative large labeled labels. Only ever two of the labels in one line. If you start testing the class initial, this is the output of the following program. If you change the mouse width of the name, so there is only space for the one label per line or even three labels per line. Border layout as layout manager. To divide the container into the five areas, north, south, west, east, and center. We use the object of the class border as layout manager. In this, five areas and components can be inserted, making a total of five components may appear, while the size of the components in the north and the south are the usual height and that of the components in the west and east is determined. And its usual width, the size of the central area may vary according to the size of the container. Accordingly, the size the size of there are added component adapted. The following constructors of the border layout class are available. Public border layout. Create a border layout object with the default settings, zero spaces between the areas. Border layout. Int h into v. Creates a border layout object with horizontal or vertical distance of h and v pixels between the areas. When uh, when adding components to the containers, using the add method, the second parameter can be also be used to determine the area into which the component is inserted. This is this is also be used to determine the area to the component which is to be inserted. Then this is done using of the class contains north, south, west, east, defined in the border layout. The layout center and center. Calling up the method direction corresponds a call with the border layout center. To clarify the different areas border layout, we have labels placed there again objects of self-written label class.java. and we'll test it now. Colored in different shades of gray. If you change the width of the mouse in our frame, one can determine the size of the edge components remains the same, while the components in the center is dynamically related to the total size adjust of the frame. Now you can see grid layout as a layout match. If you want the container area in a grid or table like arranged cells, spills, and you can object of classes grid layout as a layout manager. You already specify how many lines are called when the constructor is called or columns should be created. All inserted components are then displayed in the same size according to this specification so that cells available space is completely filled. The default is between the components no distance. The grid layout can provide the following constructors. The public grid layout creates a grid layout object with standard settings, no space between cells. Public grid layout int z int s creates a grid layout with z rows and z columns and default settings for the distances either z or s can also have the number of zeros have what stands for any number. Public grid layout int z int s int h int v creates a grid layout object with z rows S columns and horizontal ones and the vertical distance of H and the V pixels. As the Z can be or S can be used also have value 0 which stands for any number. In this layout, the components are in the order of the axes inserted in the table or the grid it starts in. The top line, they're filled from left to right and each with the one below line. Continued. Here I'm using again my self-written class java class data java for the class object. Conclusion. We can have one clarified definition of the respective cell size grid layout with two rows and three columns as we see a horizontal respective. Call vertical cell spacing of 10 to 40 pixels selected. The different labels in the individual cell have again colored differently with the different size font. In the above figure, is now is a particular to recognize that the cell size is not sufficient for the all labels. Is so being that the label text is the necessary automatically abbreviated. Thank you.